Good Morning America studio hummed with the usual pre-dawn energy. Production assistants scurried across the set making last-minute adjustments, while the makeup team applied final touches to the hosts' faces under the unforgiving studio lights. In the green room, two-time Academy Award winner Denzel Washington sat quietly reviewing talking points for his upcoming interview, promoting his latest directorial effort, a historical drama about a little-known civil rights hero that had taken him 5 years to bring to the screen. This particular GMA appearance hadn't been Washington's idea. His publicist had insisted it was necessary after several smaller outlets had mischaracterized both the film and Washington's intentions in making it. "We need to set the record straight on a major platform," she had explained. Washington had reluctantly agreed, despite his well-known dislike for the promotional circuit. Meanwhile, at the anchor desk, Michael Strahan was having an intense conversation with an executive producer. Their voices were hushed, but their body language suggested disagreement. "The network wants this to go viral," the producer insisted, showing Strahan a tablet with declining viewership numbers. "Morning shows are dying. We need moments that get shared." "I know Denzel," Strahan replied, shaking his head. "He's here to discuss the film, not to be ambushed." "Trust me," the producer countered. "He's a professional. Just throw in a couple of the questions we added this morning. If he doesn't want to answer, he'll pivot like they all do." Strahan looked unconvinced but nodded reluctantly as the floor director began the countdown to the live segment. The red light on camera 1 illuminated and the interview began with the usual pleasantries. "Welcome back to GMA," Strahan said with his signature smile. "We're thrilled to have the legendary Denzel Washington with us this morning, here to talk about his powerful new film, The Forgotten March. Thanks for joining us, Denzel." "Thank you for having me," Washington replied with professional courtesy, though those familiar with him might have noticed a certain wariness in his eyes. "This film tells an incredible story that most Americans have never heard," Strahan began, following the agreed-upon talking points. "What drew you to this particular historical figure?" For the next few minutes, the interview proceeded as expected, with Washington thoughtfully discussing his creative process and the historical significance of the film. The tension in his shoulders began to ease as he spoke passionately about the project that had consumed so much of his time and energy. Then, without warning, Strahan changed course. "You know, Denzel, there's been some controversy surrounding this film. Several commentators have suggested you're pushing a specific political agenda rather than telling a historically accurate story. Social media has been particularly harsh, with some calling the film divisive propaganda. How do you respond to those criticisms?" The studio fell silent. This question hadn't been in the pre-approved list, and it referenced fringe criticisms from provocateurs rather than legitimate film reviewers. Washington's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a momentary flash of surprise quickly replaced by controlled neutrality. "I'm not familiar with those particular criticisms, Michael," Washington responded evenly. "The film is meticulously researched and historically accurate. We worked with leading historians to ensure that." "But surely you must be aware of the political implications," Strahan pressed, seemingly committed to the new direction, "especially given some of your past comments about..." What happened next would not only derail the scheduled GMA programming, but would send shockwaves through the television industry and spark a national conversation about media ethics, respect, and the increasingly desperate tactics employed by traditional networks in the age of declining viewership. Before we continue with this explosive confrontation, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more behind-the-scenes insights into Hollywood's most dramatic moments. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our coverage of celebrity confrontations that mainstream media tries to sweep under the rug. To understand why this confrontation between Strahan and Washington escalated so dramatically, we need to know who these men are and what they represent in American culture. Denzel Washington had built his legendary status in Hollywood not just through his undeniable talent, but through decades of carefully chosen roles and professional conduct. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Washington had largely avoided controversy throughout his career, focusing instead on his craft and selective charitable work. Known for his intense preparation and dedication to historical accuracy, Washington had increasingly moved behind the camera to tell stories he felt were overlooked by mainstream Hollywood. His latest film, The Forgotten March, represented the culmination of this evolution, a deeply researched historical drama about a civil rights leader whose contributions had been erased from most history books. Washington had invested not just his creative energy, but millions of his own money to ensure the project maintained its historical integrity rather than bending to commercial pressures. The film had received standing ovations at early festival screenings, with critics praising its nuanced approach to a complex historical period. Behind his public persona, Washington was known within the industry for setting clear professional boundaries. He rarely discussed his private life or political views, focusing interviews strictly on his work. He had walked away from projects when he felt lines were being crossed, and while always polite, he was uncompromising about how he and his work were presented. As one director who had worked with him put it, Denzel has zero tolerance for disrespect, but he'll always give you a chance to correct course before he makes a decision. Michael Strahan had successfully transitioned from NFL stardom to television personality, bringing his charismatic presence to Good Morning America after a successful run co-hosting with Kelly Ripa. Known for his genial interview style and broad appeal, Strahan had built his broadcasting reputation on making guests feel comfortable while gently extracting engaging stories from them. His approach typically emphasized positivity and lighthearted moments rather than confrontation or controversy. However, the landscape of morning television had changed dramatically in recent years. Traditional broadcasts were hemorrhaging viewers to social media platforms and streaming services. Network executives, desperate to remain relevant, had begun pushing hosts to create viral moments that could be clipped and shared online. This pressure had created tension behind the scenes, with established hosts like Strahan caught between their instincts for respectful interviewing and increasing demands for content that would drive engagement regardless of journalistic integrity. Recent America had been particularly affected by these shifts. Once the ratings leader among morning shows, GMA had seen its audience erode, especially among younger viewers. Recent executive meetings had emphasized the need for shareable moments and conversation-starting interviews, euphemisms for more provocative content. Several producers had been hired from tabloid-adjacent backgrounds, bringing a more sensationalist approach to the historically respectable program. The stakes of this particular interview extended far beyond personal reputations. For Washington, The Forgotten March represented not just another film, but a deeply personal project intended to correct a historical injustice. Any misrepresentation threatened not just his artistic vision, but the historical legacy he was working to restore. For Strahan, the stakes were equally significant. Navigating the changing expectations of morning television while maintaining his integrity had become increasingly challenging. His relationship with the network executives had grown strained as he pushed back against some of their more aggressive content suggestions. For Good Morning America and network television more broadly, the stakes were existential. In a media environment increasingly dominated by unfiltered social media content, traditional broadcasts were struggling to define their role and value. How they handled interviews with figures like Washington would determine whether they could maintain credibility while still attracting viewers in a clickbait-driven landscape. As Strahan continued his unexpected line of questioning, these competing pressures, Washington's commitment to integrity, Strahan's conflicted professional position, and the network's desperate need for engagement were about to collide in spectacular fashion on live national television. "I'm not sure what past comments you're referring to, Michael," Washington replied, his voice still controlled but with a new edge to it. "But I'm here to discuss the film, which is based on documented historical events." Strahan glanced briefly toward the producer, who was nodding encouragingly from behind the camera. "You've generally kept your political views private throughout your career," he continued, "but this film comes at a particularly divided time in our country. Some viewers might see it as taking a side in current debates about how history should be taught in schools." Washington's posture shifted subtly. Those familiar with his performances might have recognized the same controlled tension he brought to characters reaching their breaking point. "The film presents historical facts, not political positions," he stated. "If accurately portraying history is now considered political, then we have a bigger problem than my film." The atmosphere in the studio had changed dramatically. Production assistants exchanged nervous glances while the floor director made a subtle wrap-it-up gesture that Strahan either didn't see or chose to ignore. Speaking of historical accuracy, Strahan pressed on, taking out a card that hadn't been in his original notes, I have here a quote from an interview you reportedly gave in 1998 where you said, "Stop," Washington interrupted, holding up his hand. His voice remained measured, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. "That's not what I'm here to discuss. I agreed to talk about the film." A tense silence fell over the studio. In the control room, producers were divided, some frantically signaling to move on, others excited by the building tension that was translating into exactly the kind of moment they had been pushing for. Strahan hesitated, visibly conflicted before continuing. "I understand, but our viewers are interested in the context around the film. There's been speculation online about your relationship with the subject's family and allegations that certain events were dramatized for political impact rather than historical accuracy." Washington's expression hardened. "Those allegations come from people who haven't seen the film and have no knowledge of our research process. We worked directly with the subject's family and leading historians in the field. Every scene is documented." But the timing of the release, just months before a major election. The film's release date was determined by the studio based on festival scheduling. Washington cut in, his voice now carrying an unmistakable warning. "Are you suggesting otherwise?" The control room was in chaos. The executive producer was frantically speaking into Strahan's earpiece, though it wasn't clear whether he was being told to back off or push harder. The two other GMA hosts watched from the side of the set, their expressions a mixture of concern and disbelief. Strahan appeared to make a decision. There's also been discussion about funding sources for the film. Reports suggest that a significant portion came from political action committees with specific agendas. "This is absolutely false," Washington stated, his voice rising for the first time. "Where are you getting this misinformation?" Instead of answering, Strahan pressed on, now clearly committed to the confrontational path. "I have here an analysis showing thematic parallels between your film and current legislative proposals." "This interview is over," Washington said, reaching for his microphone clip. His movements were controlled, but his expression had transformed completely, the professional mask replaced by genuine anger. Strong made one final attempt. "Our audience deserves to know if there's political motivation behind." What happened next shocked even the producers, who had been pushing for a viral moment. Washington stood up with such sudden force that his chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor with a sound that reverberated through the silent studio. "Enough!" Washington's voice boomed through the studio, a sound familiar to moviegoers who had seen him in roles of righteous indignation, but shocking in its authenticity in this context. This is not journalism, this is not integrity, this is clickbait masquerading as an interview. He ripped off his microphone and threw it onto the chair. 30 years I've been doing interviews. Never have I been blindsided with such blatant misrepresentations and fabrications. Strahan rose from his chair, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Denzel, we're just asking questions that—" "No." Washington's voice cut through the studio like a blade. "You're not just asking questions. You're repeating false claims from discredited sources that you know I haven't heard before so you can get a reaction. That's not an interview, that's an ambush." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. In the control room, producers were split between those frantically signaling to cut to commercial and others insisting they stay live, mesmerized by the raw authenticity of the moment. "Your producers?" Washington continued, pointing toward the control room, "fed you questions designed to provoke rather than inform. Questions based on falsehoods that a simple fact check would have disproven." He shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "I expected better from you, Michael, I really did." Doran stood frozen, clearly torn between his role as the network's representative and his personal discomfort with the situation. "If I've misrepresented anything—" "If?" Washington's eyebrows raised. "There is no if here. You stated as fact that political action committees funded my film. That is categorically false. You implied we manipulated historical events for political purposes. Also false. You suggested the release timing was politically motivated when it was determined by festival schedules set 2 years ago. The studio had fallen into complete silence, with even the typically bustling crew standing motionless, watching the confrontation unfold. "I've spent 5 years researching this story," Washington continued, his voice slightly quieter but no less intense. "Working with historians, archivists, and the subject's family to ensure we honor the truth of what happened. And you're trying to reduce that to a political talking point for ratings." From the side of the studio, a security guard had appeared, uncertain whether to approach. The floor director waved him forward, even as the executive producer was frantically signaling to wait. Washington noticed the security guard and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Really? That's your response?" He turned to address the guard directly. "I'm not the threat here, brother. The threat is to journalistic integrity and basic professional respect." The security guard stopped, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Washington turned back to Strahan, who had remained silent. "Here's what's going to happen," Washington said, his voice now controlled again but still carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm going to walk off this set, but before I do, I want everyone watching to understand exactly what happened here." He turned to face the main camera directly. "This show attempted to boost its ratings by ambushing me with false information about a historical film that honors a forgotten American hero. They didn't do this because they care about historical accuracy or political influence. They did it because outrage drives engagement." The production team, recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary, kept the cameras rolling. Washington's direct address to the audience had transformed the interview into something else entirely. A real-time media criticism that was far more compelling than the planned discussion. "To the viewers at home, I invite you to see the film for yourselves. Judge its historical accuracy, research the remarkable true story it tells, and then ask yourselves why certain media outlets seem so determined to undermine stories that don't fit convenient narratives." He turned back to Strahan, whose expression reflected a complex mixture of professional obligation and personal regret. "Michael, you're better than this. At least I thought you were." With that, Washington straightened his jacket and walked deliberately toward the exit. The security guard, now clearly understanding that his services weren't needed to restrain Washington but perhaps to escort him out, moved alongside him. As they reached the edge of the set, Washington stopped and turned back. "One last thing. The next time you want to create a viral moment by disrespecting someone's work and integrity, don't invite me to be part of it." The studio doors closed behind him with a finality that seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the set. Strahan remained standing, microphone in hand, as the producer's voice finally came through his earpiece. "Cut to commercial, now." The fallout from Washington's explosive exit was immediate and far-reaching. Before Good Morning America even returned from the hastily extended commercial break, clips of the confrontation were already spreading across social media platforms. Denzel Explodes and Dead Maddish Grace began trending nationwide, with viewers sharing the unfiltered moment that had broken through the usually polished veneer of morning television. When the program returned, a visibly shaken Strahan addressed the audience. "We want to apologize to our viewers and to Denzel Washington for what just occurred. That's not how we intended the conversation to go, and we regret how the situation unfolded." The statement, clearly crafted by network lawyers during the commercial break, did little to stem the tide of public reaction. Behind the scenes, the GMA studio had erupted into chaos. The executive producer who had pushed for the confrontational approach was in a heated argument with network executives who had been called in immediately after the incident. Staff members were overheard saying that Strahan had disappeared into his dressing room, refusing to continue with the broadcast. Robin Roberts, who had been off segment during the interview, reportedly stepped in to handle the remainder of the program. By mid-morning, the clip had been viewed more than 15 million times across various platforms. Public reaction was overwhelming in its support for Washington, with commenters from across the political spectrum condemning what they saw as a deliberately provocative interview strategy designed for clicks rather than substance. Media critics weighed in almost immediately, with the Columbia Journalism Review publishing an analysis by afternoon titled "The GMA Ambush: When Morning Shows Sacrifice Ethics for Engagement." The piece detailed the growing pressure on traditional broadcasts to create viral moments, often at the expense of journalistic standards. The incident sparked a broader conversation about the state of television journalism in the digital age. The New York Times ran an editorial examining how declining viewership had pushed once respectable programs toward increasingly sensationalist tactics. When Denzel Washington called out GMA's approach as clickbait masquerading as an interview, the piece noted, he articulated what many media critics have been concerned about for years. For Good Morning America, the consequences were swift and severe. By the following day, 3 major celebrities had canceled scheduled appearances, with their publicists explicitly citing the Washington incident. Internal emails leaked to entertainment news outlets revealed network executives scrambling to implement new guidelines for interview questions and guest approval processes. The fallout extended to advertising as well. 2 major sponsors reportedly expressed concerns about being associated with what one brand representative called ambush journalism and requested their ads be pulled from the program pending a review of interview practices. For Strahan, the professional damage was significant. Sources close to the former NFL star told People magazine that he had been deeply uncomfortable with the direction he'd been pushed to take in the interview. Michael has always prided himself on creating a comfortable environment for guests, one source claimed. He was put in an impossible position between network demands and his own professional standards. 3 days after the incident, Strahan issued a more personal apology on social media, acknowledging that he had failed to stand up for the kind of interview integrity I believe in. He announced he would be taking a 2-week break from the program to reflect on my role and responsibilities as a broadcaster. Industry insiders speculated that the break might become permanent, as Strahan reportedly entered discussions about the future of his contract. The producer who had pushed for the confrontational approach was removed from the program within a week, though the network characterized it as a reassignment rather than a termination. Inside sources revealed that a comprehensive review of interview policies was underway across all of the network's news and entertainment programs. For Washington, the incident paradoxically enhanced his already stellar reputation. His willingness to forcefully but articulately stand up for his work and his principles resonated with the public in ways that a standard promotional interview never could have. Ticket pre-sales for The Forgotten March surged in the days following the GMA appearance, with many online commenters specifically citing their desire to support Washington after seeing how passionately he defended the project. Film critics who had been given early access to The Forgotten March rushed to publish their reviews, almost uniformly confirming Washington's assertions about its historical accuracy and artistic merit. The New Yorker's review specifically addressed the GMA controversy, noting that the meticulous research Washington referenced is evident in every frame of this remarkable film, making the attempt to frame it as political propaganda all the more egregious. Washington himself maintained his characteristic dignity in the aftermath. His only public comment came a week later during a previously scheduled interview with Terry Gross on Fresh Air when she inevitably asked about the incident. "I've always believed that there should be mutual respect between interviewers and their guests," Washington said thoughtfully. "When that respect is violated, particularly in service of generating controversy rather than understanding, something valuable is lost. Not just for the people involved, but for the audience in our broader culture." When pressed on whether he regretted his forceful response, Washington was characteristically direct. "I regret that the situation arose. I regret that a program once known for journalistic integrity chose to prioritize provocation over substance. But I don't regret standing up for the truth of our film and the dignity of everyone who worked on it." The long-term impact of the confrontation extended beyond the immediate participants. Journalism schools incorporated the clip into their ethics curriculum, using it to discuss the tensions between engagement-driven content and journalistic responsibility. The Poynter Institute published a comprehensive case study examining how commercial pressures were reshaping broadcast journalism and where ethical lines should be drawn. Morning television itself underwent a period of soul-searching. Producers across networks began reconsidering their approach to interviews, with several programs explicitly moving away from gotcha moments toward more substantive conversations. As one industry analyst observed in a widely shared LinkedIn post, the Washington incident forced a reckoning that was long overdue. When you lose the trust of someone with his stature, it signals a systemic problem that can't be ignored. Perhaps most significantly, The incident sparked a broader cultural conversation about respect, integrity, and authenticity in an era increasingly dominated by manufactured outrage. Washington's refusal to participate in what he called clickbait, masquerading as an interview, resonated with a public growing weary of content designed to provoke rather than inform. 6 months later, The Forgotten March was nominated for multiple Academy Awards, including Best Director for Washington. In interviews during award season, Washington consistently redirected questions about the GMA incident toward discussions of the film's historical subject and the importance of telling overlooked stories in American history. The confrontation that began with an attempt to create a viral moment had indeed gone viral, but not in the way GMA producers had intended. Instead of a manufactured controversy, audiences had witnessed something increasingly rare in modern media: an authentic moment of principled conviction that cut through the noise and reminded everyone that even in an engagement-driven media landscape, integrity still matters. If you found this breakdown of one of television's most explosive confrontations revealing, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the media moments that mainstream coverage glosses over. Comment below with your thoughts on whether Washington was right to stand his ground or if you think there was a better way he could have handled the situation.